podcasts can inspire, thrill, and inform you. There is content from self-help to true crime. Whether you're looking for parenting tips or business development support, the world of podcasts has got you covered. The trick is to find one that you like, and one of the best ways to do this is via a detailed podcast recommendation. Welcome to episode 172 of Be The Drop, a weekly interview podcast sharing stories from people who inspire and motivate others to help you learn how to tell your story. I'm Amelia Veal, Director at Narrative Marketing and firm believer in the superpower of storytelling. 2019 has been an incredibly exciting year for podcasting, with increasing numbers of people listening to, creating, and investing in podcasts. As the number of podcasts increases, it can be hard to decide which one you should listen to, which is why we love podcast recommendations. According to the 2019 ABC Podcast Survey, word of mouth is the number one means of discovering new podcasts. When James Cridland from Podnews is presenting at conferences, he makes a point of recommending a podcast he's currently loving. So we've decided as our Christmas gift to you to do the same. In today's episode of Be The Drop, members of the narrative marketing team each share our top 3 podcast recommendations. With recommendations of podcasts from thought-provoking to crass humour, there's something for everyone. This is Be The Drop podcast recommendations. Chris has created a Podchaser list to help make it easier for you to access the podcast we have recommended. Hit the link in the show notes to check it out. In the spirit of Christmas sharing, we would love to hear your top podcast recommendations so we can share these with others by adding them to the list. Let us know via the contact details which are included at the end of this episode. I'm very excited to share my podcast recommendations with you. As I was limited to only 3 recommendations, I have deliberately chosen 3 very different podcasts to recommend. My first recommendation is called Better Off Dead with Andrew Denton. It's a podcast that investigates the barriers around assisted dying and asks the question, why are good people forced to die bad deaths? I give this podcast 5 stars. This is not a new podcast. It was actually released in 2015, 2016. The top reason I find it so powerful and why I still recommend it is because it delivers such thought-invoking and accessible conversations on a complex, emotive, but also incredibly important topic. Andrew Denton is a masterful interviewer and storyteller, and this series includes a variety of first-hand experiences of death, which is at times confronting, definitely confronting, but always insightful. And Andrew delivers a really robust conversations about a topic that is generally taboo and something that we quite often shy away from. I would recommend this podcast for people who want to learn more about euthanasia and assisted dying, and people who are looking to inform themselves with a deeper level of understanding. This podcast will arm you with much to think about and some potentially controversial, but definitely not dull, conversation starters for the Christmas and New Year's parties. For those of you who might want more updated recent information since this podcast, Andrew has founded an organisation called Go Gentle, which is an expert advisory and health promotion charity for a better conversation around death, dying and end-of-life choices, in particular voluntary assisted dying. So just a completely change of pace and style, the second podcast that I recommend is called Short and Curly. It's produced by ABC Radio, and it is a fast-paced, fun-filled ethics podcast for kids and their parents. From banning lollies to trusting robots, Short and Curly opens up potentially curly conversations. I give this podcast 4.5 stars. I love this podcast because it's a great opportunity for myself and my 10-year-old son to listen to episodes on topical issues, and then we follow this with all sorts of weird and wonderful conversations. And for me, with the increasing pervasiveness of digital devices, sharing this experience with him provides a unique opportunity for connection and engaging of the minds, which I really value. I recommend this podcast to parents who are looking to inspire the inquisitive minds of their kids. It also helps to open communication channels with your children on topics that may be challenging to navigate, with episodes such as "Was Robin Hood right? Should you rob the rich to help the poor?" So if you're going on a road trip these school holidays, this is a perfect podcast to listen to whilst driving. It will provide a great shared family experience that can spark some really interesting ideas. And my third podcast recommendation is called Be the Drop. Okay, so this is definitely cheeky, as you're currently listening to Be the Drop, for which I'm incredibly humbled. I assume this means I don't need to actually recommend the podcast to you. However, as recommendations are an increasingly popular way for people to discover new podcasts, I would be forever grateful if you were to recommend my podcast. With this in mind, I thought I would share with you how I recommend Be the Drop to potential listeners. What I love about this podcast is that it includes stories from an incredibly diverse range of people. The broad range of perspectives and lived experiences provide real-life examples for listeners to learn how to tell their own story in an inspiring and motivating way. I recommend this podcast to people who have a story to tell but are struggling to understand how they should tell it. The range of topics covered will appeal to business owners, marketers, social entrepreneurs, and more generally to people with an interest in listening to inspiring success stories. And in case you were wondering, I give this podcast 5 stars. Of course I do.
Hi, Be the Drop listeners. My name's Chris, and I'm the video and podcast creator for Narrative Marketing. I've been working on Be the Drop podcast since it started, and I'm an avid podcast listener in my spare time. I listen to podcasts while I'm doing housework and while I'm driving or when I'm out walking, and I'm always looking for great shows to listen to. So here are my 3 recommendations for podcasts you should try. The first podcast I want to share is My Dad Wrote a Porno, which is a show featuring 3 friends, Jamie, James, and Alice, who laugh, cry, and are confused by Jamie's dad's decision to start writing pornographic novels in his retirement. They're about a woman named Belinda, an international sales director at a fictitious cookware company, steals pots and pans. They're currently reading the 5th book in the series, and in between each episode, they bring in famous people like Elijah Wood and Michael Sheen and Lin-Manuel Miranda as well. And they talk about the experience listening to the podcast. I recommend this podcast to anyone I know. And if you like naughty British humour and want to listen to a podcast that doesn't take itself too seriously, then this is the show for you, I think. It's a great listen if you're having an average day and you need a pickup. Just make sure you aren't doing anything that requires too much focus, because you might double over laughing at outrageous things that they read out. The second podcast I think you should check out is Freakonomics Radio. To me, it's the king of topical narrative podcasts that incorporate interesting interviews with really cool people. There are hundreds of episodes, so I recommend going through the feed and downloading episodes with subjects that you're interested in. So Freakonomics is hosted by Stephen Dubner, and it invites you to discover the hidden side of everything. I've enjoyed the recent episode, The Prime Minister Who Cried Brexit, where Stephen interviews former UK Prime Minister David Cameron about why he decided he should start about Brexit. I also like listening to the episode How to Change Your Mind, and that explores the many challenges of changing your thoughts on a topic and why we should be encouraging it more. It kind of helped with the Transcending documentary we're working on at the moment. It's a good show to listen to when you want to learn something new and inform yourself or be inspired. And the third podcast I listen to regularly and recommend is Podnews, a daily podcast hosted by James Cridland. And that's around the topic of podcasting and on-demand audio. To me, it's a really convenient digest of the latest goings on in podcasting. It's also nice to hear it read by someone who deeply cares about the open and evolving concept of podcasting. And James was a guest on Be The Drop episode 165, and it was good to meet him and ask him questions in person about how he thinks podcasting will change in the future. He's also set it up as an Alexa skill and a Google Home news show, and also a blog on podnews.net. And that's how Amelia chooses to get his info, because she also gets news from him. So James has really thought about multiple ways of people consuming pod news. It's a show for people who want to know more about podcasting. It's a good morning listen if you have your own podcast, if you want to know which company Spotify's bought today, or you want to keep ahead of the trends in podcasting genres and platforms. Okay, so that's my top 3 podcast recommendations. So My Dad Wrote a Porno for something fun, Freakonomics Radio to learn something new, or Pod News to follow the news on podcasting. So 3 very different podcasts that I like listening to, and they all get 5 stars from me. If you want to know more about shows I like, you can find me on podchaser.com as Christopher Warman, and I've got my top 8 podcasts there, and also a list of my favorite episodes of Be The Drop, so check that out if you want to. I hope you all have a great holiday break this year, and thanks for listening.
Well, hi guys, and Merry Christmas. I'm Kristen Werner. I'm a long-time listener to the Narrative Marketing podcast, Be The Drop, and I'm a long-time worker with narrative marketing, which is even better. I'm the production assistant for Transcending the Gender Narrative, the documentary that Narrative Market is currently working on, which is really exciting. 2020, here we come. And I'm also a personal brand and business brand consultant, a mum of 2, and I love sharing out all kinds of brand love for things that I generally love to listen to. So today I'm giving you my top 3 podcast tips. So first of all, I'd have to say, Seize the Yay, Spoonful of Sarah. It is just one of my favourites at the moment, and I'm going to give it 5 stars because it's my Tuesday, put my headphones in, I'm taking the kids to kinder gym. I just tune out a little bit and just let it kind of run through either the car speakers or I put one headphone in. For me, I think it's really inspiring. The people that she has on the podcast are incredible people, male and female, doing amazing things. For me, I just love the inspirational stories. And I think the people that will like this kind of podcast are people that love hearing other people's journeys and their stories, their successes and their triumphs, as well as their failures and how they did what they did. And I love being inspired by how people get through moments and what gets them down and what gets them up. For me, hearing somebody's story is a huge education for how I can do my life better and how I can do my business better. And for me, that was just there's some incredible stories on there. I think it's for entrepreneurs. I hate the word hustle, but mums with a hustle or mums with a side business, or, women and men that just want to do something different but don't know how to do it or where to go. It's really inspiring in that way. And anyone that just wants to get shit done. I think I've heard a couple and then gone out and got into it. So for me, that's my number 1. So my second pick is Game Changers by Erin May Henry, and I would certainly give that 4 stars. Absolutely love it. She's amazing, and I feel like I would just really like to sit down and have a wine with her. I feel like we'd really have some long chats about all things personal branding. I love her style. I love the way that she educates people around personal branding. And for me, I found her at a time I was really struggling with imposter syndrome, I think, in terms of how I educate people around personal branding. And I was starting to think, well, who the heck am I to educate people around this kind of topic? And she really cemented for me that it's how I do it. And it's really important that I do it my way for people, because we all do our things differently. And so for me, she's been a huge influence in the way that I'm doing my business. And I think people that will like this type of podcast are people that really want to build their own personal brand confidence and their own brand confidence and helping understand a different way to tell their story. I'd say it's for everybody, but for people that are really in business for themselves and in business to understand how powerful their brand can really be. Same again, I think it's for entrepreneurs. I think it's for mums getting shit done. For me, that one really hit a good core. And then my third one would be the Pineapple Project. It's the ABCs and it's Claire Hooper does it. It's fantastic and I would give it 3.5 stars. I really, really enjoy it and it's just a beautiful cross of absolutely everything. I just love it because it's hilarious. She's so honest and she's so real and she interviews people in a really wonderful, authentic way. I love it because it's really, really random and it covers kind of everything. It's funny and motivational. It's honest and real. For me, I found it's got this really nice balance that comes from work and then comes into home life and back again. It's really quite unique in that way. I think it's for somebody in kind of any stage of life, and I liked it because for me it started, I randomly clicked on it and there was something about imposter syndrome, so you can kind of see a thread here. Became a mum, kind of lost myself, found myself, and now I'm really enjoying this part of my process. So for me, you can probably see a thread. And then all of a sudden the other day, I was in my house full of a nearly 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and there was mess everywhere. And the particular podcast I was listening to was all about tidying the kitchen and decluttering. So it was really, really perfect timing for me to listen to that and kind of take relief and have some kind of humour to the fact that I was living in this ridiculous mess, but I was cleaning it and listening to the podcast at the same time. So for me, it was this really nice, it kind of covers everything in quite a humorous manner. So that for me is my top 3. So it is the Seize the A, Game Changers, and the Pineapple Project. And I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas, and I look forward to hearing what the other team members have to say about theirs, and I look forward to tuning into some more podcasts because I'm personally really enjoying them. Thanks.
Hi guys, Beck here, Be the Drop editor and camera operator for our upcoming documentary, Transcending the Gender Narrative. My first podcast recommendation is Talking Taste Buds by Venetia Falconer. Each week, Venetia brings in a new guest and chats about their relationship with food and how it affects their life. Through this, she's able to touch on a variety of topics, often touching on mental health, activism, and sustainability. I love how relaxed and honest this podcast is. It's like listening in on two friends chat in their living room, and often the topics get just as deep as chats between friends would. I think people who are around their early 20s to mid-30s would enjoy this podcast, especially those interested in social activism and have a progressive mindset. Things can get pretty out there and pretty hipster. I give Talking Taste Buds 4 stars. My second podcast recommendation is Represent by Slate, hosted by Aisha Harris. Represent talks all about films, TV shows, and online shows that are created by or about women, people of colour, people with disabilities, and those in the LGBTIQA+ community. I love this podcast as this topic is something I'm really passionate about, and learning about how people from these groups are pioneering their way in the industry is really inspiring to me. It's also great for getting an education on which films and shows haven't done so great at accurate representation and why. I would recommend this podcast to anyone who loves film and TV and who also has an interest in the groups that they speak about. I give this podcast 5 stars. My final podcast episode is a little less heavy than the previous 2, and it's called George Ezra and Friends by musician George Ezra. George interviews different musicians and has a casual chat to them about their lives and their careers, but in a super casual, fun way. Some of his A-list guests include Ed Sheeran, Elton John, Kurt Vile, and Sam Smith. I highly recommend this podcast to anyone just looking for a chill podcast to listen to while driving or cooking dinner. It's just super easy listening, but also super interesting. I give this podcast 5 stars. Thanks for listening. I hope you have a great Christmas.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Be the Drop. Don't forget to subscribe in order to ensure you never miss out on one of our weekly episodes. Be the Drop is produced by Narrative Marketing, where we believe that stories connect individuals and that powerful storytelling can positively impact the world. To unleash your storytelling superpower, visit narrativemarketing.com.au or check out our social links in the show notes. To contact me directly with any specific comments you have, you can email me via amelia@narrativemarketing.com.au. And don't forget that whilst a task or challenge may seem overwhelming, a waterfall begins with one drop. And look what comes from that.